And now,
it's 10 a.m.
Let's just get down to it.
And it's time for your sports fix.
Strap yourselves in, folks.
From two guys who have covered the teams you're passionate about for years.
We are professionals.
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. No Jake Scott again today. He'll be back with us beginning next Monday. Very happy Tuesday to everybody out there. Loaded show today regardless. Mike Smith's going to join us coming up momentarily. Talking some Utah Jazz basketball, back in action tonight against the Boston Celtics before a long 4-game road trip. Come back home for 2 games and go back on the road for 5. So I think we have a pretty good sense over these next, 5, 6, 7, 12 games of what the Jazz are going to look like by mid-January. 9 road games, 3 home games. And some tough opponents mixed in there, including tonight against the Boston Celtics, who the Jazz have already beaten once this season on the road on a Yusuf Nurkic near buzzer beater. We'll see if the Jazz sweep the Celtics. Keontae George listed as questionable due to an illness. Steve Bartle's going to join us coming up at 11. I thought Steve had a good article on the value of Morgan Scalley and the role he's going to play as the head coach at Utah, how it's different than Kyle Whittingham, and why that's a good thing for the Utes. We'll talk about that, certainly, what he expects from the transfer portal, what he expects from the coaching hires. John Henry Daley this morning threw his name into the transfer portal. Maybe a surprise to some, including myself, that he will be available by spring. That's certainly a good sign wherever he's going. I thought it would be a longer injury than that, so good for John Henry Daley, but bad for the University of Utah. I would imagine Michigan would be very highly ranked in his transfer portal destinations. And then Cole Bagley will join us as the Utah Mammoth suffer a bad loss last night at home to the Nashville Predators, giving up a couple of goals despite having a late lead. What's going on with the Utah Mammoth? Feeling like they're playing very well, despite the fact that the team has not. So we'll talk to Cole about that, what he sees as the issues with the team since we last spoke to him. So very excited on a very busy show today with the Jazz in action tonight against the Boston Celtics. Boston has been maybe one of the bigger surprise teams in the NBA this year, and they have certainly kept it afloat with the Jazz, despite the fact that they have not had Jason Tatum so far this season. He's been out with the Achilles injury, and they hope to get him back. And some people thought maybe this would be a gap year for the Celtics where they would try and focus on getting a good draft pick, maybe semi-blow up their roster, trade a Derek White, let Jaylen Brown sit for long stretches, get a high draft pick, and then come back with their second idea of a championship team. But that is not the plan. They have been competing very well in the Eastern Conference and look to be making a good push towards the playoffs and hope to add Jason Tatum later in the year. Let's welcome in our next guest. He is a Utah Jazz analyst on the pre-half and post-game shows. Also, you can hear him throughout the broadcast. It is Mike Smith. What's going on, Mike?
Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing terrific. Mike, this is a game the Jazz have already beat the Celtics once this year. I don't think anyone before the season maybe penciled in the Jazz going for a sweep, but I think that's very much on the table tonight.
The way they're playing offensively, the way they're playing the last couple of games, they would have some momentum. So, yeah, I would say it's possible for sure. It's going to be electric. I tried to get a little extra tickets tonight. None of those in sight, which is a good thing, I guess. So it'll be fun.
I was surprised the Jazz beat the Detroit Pistons and San Antonio Spurs on back-to-back nights. I think everybody was. But again, the story has been that Keontae George, even since we last talked, Mike, is better than he was when we last spoke. Over his last 8 games, he's averaging 30 points, something like 7 assists, 4 rebounds, 5 rebounds, 49% from the floor, 40% from 3, 90% from the free throw line. The stat out there is that the only other 2 players in NBA history who have done that over an 8-game stretch are Michael Jordan and Luka Doncic, who are pretty good players.
Wow.
Are we recognizing that not only has Keontae taken a step, beyond where he was last season, but he really is playing some of the best basketball of anybody in the NBA?
He really is. And I think those of us who are close to the Jazz program, and I'm speaking like you and I and those who watch, the fans who attend, sometimes you are tainted a little bit by what you've seen before. And I don't think we should be. And I only mean that we watched this kid enter the NBA at 19. We watched him try and play point guard for the first time in his life. We watched him not be able to finish at the rim with great consistency. We watched him in year 2, let's say not shoot it that well, right? Because 39% and 33% from 2 and 3 would not qualify as good. But now we watch, and so like in the back of your mind a little bit is, oh, will he revert back to like what we saw before? And I think that's an injustice to him, and I think it's an injustice to, I don't know, like players in general. Take a Cade Cunningham, for example, who I don't get to watch a lot, right? First pick 4 years ago. I think he's in his fifth year, and now he's a stud. And he's leading Detroit to, unprecedented heights with this roster. And it's not like they have the best roster in the league. They're good at the rim with Jalen Duren, and, they block some shots. But he's a stud. I don't get to see him that often. And, Ben, I don't watch the Pistons. That's nothing against the Pistons, but I'm not on a random non-Jazz night turning on the Pistons and saying, oh, let me watch this. But I do get to see him twice a year when he plays the Jazz. And so the progress happens the same way Keontae's growth is happening, yet I don't see every little nook and cranny and pitfall along the way that taints or, hinders the way I might think about that player. All of a sudden I just say, wow, Cade Cunningham in year 5 is a freaking stud. And I think that's the way we should view Keontae. It's kind of like, okay, like what he's doing is remarkable, but it's only going to get better from here. Does that point make sense?
Yeah, I think that's what's a little bit, impressive and exciting if you're a Jazz fan, and a little bit scary if you're the rest of the NBA, is that this is probably only the beginning of Keontae George's ascent. I don't know if we're seeing him top out. His usage isn't through the roof. He still doesn't look for his shot a ton. He does certainly is looking for his shot less than he did before. Now, he's shooting more, but it's coming within the flow of the offense, so I don't feel like he's trying to take over games the way he did for long stretches. And I think actually that pendulum will probably swing back a little bit when he realizes, oh, it's actually probably better if I do dial my own number 3 or 4 more times a game, especially if I'm going to continue to shoot 45% from the floor and 37% from 3.
Yeah, so well said. Like I try and say it on our show that the increased numbers is just not a result of increased volume. Like, yeah, he's taking 19 or 20 shots a game, but you're so spot on when you say they're coming within the flow of the offense. And what he's become really good at is getting fouled. And a lot of great scorers in the history of their careers became frequent foul shooters. They got to the line when it mattered most. That is the number one most important trait that Michael Jordan possessed, other than his killer instinct, is that he knew how to get fouled at the end of games. The 97 and 98 Jazz series can illustrate that better than ever. Like, it wasn't that he made every shot down the stretch, it's that he kept putting pressure on and got fouled. And yeah, it's not beautiful basketball when you shoot a lot of free throws. But how about the Jazz of late, Ben? I think over the last 14 games, where they are 7-7, and 4 of those games Lauri didn't play. So they're a 500 team over those 14 games. They are number 2 in the league in scoring, number 2 in the league in total assists, number 4 in the league in three-point percentage, number 7 in the league in threes made, number 1 in free throws attempted, number 1 in free throws made, number 1 in assist percentage. In other words, the number of baskets that are assisted upon. And if you break that down even a little further, number 1 in the league in 2-point buckets that are assisted upon. Far and away the best team in the league in that category, not just the last 14 games, but for the entire season. If this team ever learns to defend, drafts a defender, trades for a defender, starts to get better on that end of the floor, they are a perennial annual playoff team. My opinion right now, they're that good offensively against some of the better teams in the league.
I agree. I think you're probably 2 or 3 Royce O'Neal type players away, which you can get in free agency from being a team that has pretty firmly planted itself in the top 6 in the West, which means you're guaranteed a playoff spot. You're not in the play-in tournament.
Yep, totally agree. And Royce has his flaws, right? There's no perfect players out there. They're just everybody's going to come with a few warts. Royce became a good three-point shooter. He always was a decent defender because that was his calling card to make the league. So it's important to him. And look at Phoenix. They keep winning. I don't know what their record is now. You might have it in front of you. I'm not in front of a screen, but they're either 18-13 or something like that. And I'm like, how are they winning? They're winning with Devin Booker and a bunch of nobodies. Gillespie at the point guard and, Dylan Brooks causing havoc and Royce defending. And so you're so right. You get a couple of those guys whose DNA is to defend. And, things change super quickly.
I got an interesting question. I do a mailbag on Mondays in my podcast, and a listener asked, do the Jazz need to pick between Isaiah Collier or Walt Clayton going forward as the backup point guard, or is there a world where those two and Keontae George can all exist in the backcourt, specifically because they're a little undersized to play the one and the two, though Keontae does it some?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. Not sure that it needs to be solved immediately, but like in an ideal world, probably. And I guess it depends what you get on the other end for one of those. But in the meantime, you're watching the progress. Walt seems like, Walt's coming off his best game, right? Like against San Antonio, he was so poised, so cool, made every shot he took, put pressure on the defense. I just thought he was amazing in that game. And I don't know why that happened, but part of me as I was watching that game was thinking, okay, like Ace's teammate Dylan Harper was taken with the second pick in the draft, and, I was taken much later, yet I won a national championship. But to me, it almost felt like I'm going to show Dylan Harper who the best young point guard is that was just drafted. But he didn't force anything. And then, of course, Isaiah just is so big and so strong and so fast with the ball that you almost want to wait and see what becomes of his finishing around the rim. His three-point shot, his outside shooting is better. It's still not a go-to. It's still not something he believes in 100% because he passes up a lot of open shots. And from having played in the league, you can never let your opponents think you're questioning your own ability there. You got to take those open shots when you get them. I know he worked religiously on it over the summer. But if I'm Isaiah Collier and I'm his age, the thing I'm working on most are every little shot inside 6 feet. Ben, every right-hand hook layup, every floater, every spin with either hand, every reverse layup. I try and become Steph Curry, Kyrie Irving, two of the greatest layup makers we've ever seen, with an array of shots around the rim, because he can get to the rim at will. And if he just becomes, half of those guys, or just better than he is now at the rim, watch out. He presents a different skill set than Keontae that's worth having, right? It's game-changing, his skill set, the pace, the pressure. Anyway, that's just not me speaking as a Jazz announcer. That's just kind of me as a basketball fan watching and, admiring talent and at the same time suggesting ideas like, oh, you're close to being unbelievable. This is what you need to do.
There is definitely something there with Isaiah. He shoots 37% from three. He only takes one a game, but all he needs to do is make sure you have to guard him closely, because if you guard him closely, then his speed is pretty difficult to stop. And as you mentioned, he's not little and quick. He's huge and quick. I don't know if people realize the jet engine he's got behind him that's propelling him forward. He is all muscle.
Yeah, no question.
So looking at the rest of this Jazz roster, do you think there's going to be interest in Jusuf Nurkic and Kevin Love around the trade deadline? I know Nurkic makes $19 million, and in today's day and age, it's really hard to trade that. But he's been shockingly good, I think, for the Jazz, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And Kevin Love certainly has more in the tank than I expected.
I think you're right on both ends. I don't know about the trade. deadline. I don't know what value there is out there. I don't know. Nurkic has been surprisingly good in the place of Kessler. Bigger than I thought, tougher than I thought. He's just, this will sound terrible, he's just a little careless. And I say that in the nicest way. It's almost like he can get these little shots around the rim, and I think he gets bored with them. Like, I don't know this, but he just strikes me as the guy who just probably leaves something out at his home. Like, he doesn't put it away, right? He just strikes me as this fun-loving, big hunk of a guy who can get every rebound, take up space, and he happens to be so gifted with his hands. I feel like for a guy who picked up the game late, the game came easy to him in terms of touch and feel. Like, he sees passes. He sees little floaters and little flips. Speaking of Boston, right, it's his little putback that wins the game against Boston at Boston earlier in the season. But he misses some of those, and he misses more than he should. And so I chuckle when he misses one, because Elem and I will be sitting there and we'll giggle, and I'll say, yeah, he just got bored with that one. Like, it was too easy for him. And that's sometimes how I feel. Like, the game feels like it comes so easy to him that he doesn't pay the most attention until the final second, like until the ball's done or the pass is completed. But he's an asset for sure, and he's a perfect fit in Will Hardy's, high post rub handoff offense because of the space he creates and the passes he can generate. Kevin Love's just a winner. He just doesn't have a ton left physically. He's got no more lift, which it just happens to the best of us at 18 years and 37, but he can shoot and he thinks the game. He's been so stinking supportive every time he doesn't play. He's the first one up when someone scores. There's really a lot to like about this team and a lot to like about those guys.
Those guys both space the floor. They do it in slightly different ways. Nurkic is only shooting 30% from three, and he only takes 1.5 a game. But like you said, he's always out on the perimeter with the dribble handoffs, and he can pick apart a defense from there. And Kevin Love's basically a spot-up shooter at this point. Do you think the Jazz have liked what they've gotten from having a 5 that can be out on the perimeter? And do you think that's been a reason why Lauri and Keontae are having career years? And does that influence what you think they want that 5 position to do going forward?
Well, it's a great question. I like your insights. Yeah, I mean, it most certainly could be related to the space given to Lauri and to Key. I wouldn't have come up with that myself. I wouldn't have thought, because they have a perimeter 5, these guys are having a career years. I just think they're having career years because they worked their tails off this summer, and it's the next step. Lauri wanted to make amends for a year that was forgettable, and not because he didn't play well. It just was a weird year, and he wanted to erase all that, and he always comes back great after playing in the summer all summer long. He's in such good shape and in such good form, and man, he was so good against San Antonio, Ben. Like, I often call him the most unique 7-footer in the game. And people can correct me because they'll say, what about Victor in San Antonio? I'm like, yeah, I don't think about him that often. But because I think of Lauri as a small forward, like a small forward / big forward who can do anything and score in any way. And I just don't think there's been a 7-footer like that. I really don't. Like, he's way different than Dirk, who's a 7-footer who could also shoot, but he's just so much more than Dirk was, and not better per se. They're different. Lauri's more versatile, more unique, more of a skill set. But then I see Victor, and that people will say, he's the most unique 7-footer. Well, yeah, you're right. 7'5", and he can shoot, and he changes the game. And there was a great stat coming into the Jazz game that in the minutes Victor had played since he came back from injury, the Spurs were only giving up 88 points per 100 possessions, which was why they had won 8 or 9 in a row, other than the Cup final game. But the Jazz neutralized it. And I thought they were going to play Flip or Love or Nurk or even Lauri at the 5 to neutralize Wemby in the game. And as it was Nurk who kind of dragged him away and made a couple threes early and forced there to be some openings. So Nurk played great in that game. But I thought Lauri in that game head-to-head against Wemby was the best 7-footer on the floor. He was that good, that tough, that crucial, that clutch. He's really good. If he doesn't make an all-star team this year, it's a travesty.
I think you brought it up last time we talked, and I think you're dead on, is that he's just so good when he moves, and there are not a lot of 7-footers whose entire game is based off of running every second they're on the floor, especially on the offensive side. That's hard because who do you guard him with? You know, he comes off a curl. He doesn't care if anybody's in front of him because he's probably bigger than you are. And if you're too small, he has shown a willingness to get to the rim.
No, and I think teams have tried to guard him with smaller players, which is one reason why the Jazz last year, let's just say, experimented with putting Lauri with a lot of guard or small forward, big forward swaps, pick and rolls, and then tried to give the ball to Lauri at the elbow. It was like a whole scheme. Let's get Lauri the ball there on a smaller defender and just have him shoot over him. He's okay at that, which we saw last year, not great at that. And he doesn't post up often. He can shoot over people, but he just doesn't gravitate towards that, which is very interesting. So it's to your point and to what I said earlier, it is all about movement for him. And it still makes him tough to guard. If you guard him with length, he's running past him in circles around guys. If you guard him with smaller, his mobility plus strength on the move makes him really difficult to stop.
Mike, I mean, we're 35 games into the season, something like that already, and I feel like I've barely seen you at the Jazz games. What's new with Mike?
Oh, gosh, we're getting through Christmas, right? You know, I have 10 children. That's fun. We had half of those here. It was a blast. I cannot believe the weather we've been having. I did play golf twice last week and twice the week before. Unheard of. This time of year, if you'd told me, Ben, 4 years ago when I moved to Utah, I'd have been playing golf mid or late December. So that was kind of fun. And I think I love my wife more than ever. And that's saying something after all these years. So that's kind of cool. Oh, I'll tell you what, something cool in my life. I've become an ambassador in the state of Utah for General Motors, which is just like one of the coolest things. So GM has like 7 dealerships in the state, and I'm getting to know all those dealerships, all those people who run them, and they are just first and foremost fantastic people. Brian Johnson up at like GMC Riverdale, it's a Ken Garff dealership, is a fantastic guy. Miles Penrose owns the national GMC at American Fork. He's got a guy named Justin Curtis runs that shop. They're just the greatest people. And so, I don't know if you know this about me, Ben. I love people. I love being out in the community. I love getting to know people and finding out what makes them tick or what they're good at or what they're successful at. Oftentimes I'll ask someone, tell me your talents, tell me your strengths, tell me what you're good at. And then I love learning about people. So that's kind of a fun new development. It'll keep me moving around the state when I'm not doing Jazz stuff and doing events and probably speaking to their sales teams and posting different things. But I try and stay busy. I'm looking forward to a fantastic 2026. That's about it, brother. I'm still jealous of your long locks. And I got to keep my hair short so I can look presentable on TV. And that's it. I think you're a fantastic writer.
Mike, I appreciate you. You've got better hair than I do. There's no doubt about that, but I appreciate the nice words.
You got it. See you tonight.
We'll talk to you soon, Mike. There he is. Mike Smith giving us a breakdown on the Utah Jazz. When we come back, the top 3 stories at KSLSports.com. Stick around, Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
It's time to break down the biggest stories of the day. This is the top 3 stories of the day on KSLSports.com. 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Jake out today. Christian and I rolling, not solo, but there's 2 of us. But no Jake. We'll have you covered. What are we going to do for What You Got Wednesday tomorrow? Is it going to be you and me?
If you want. I've done it with
can.
Jake before. It was pretty fun.
Okay. Well, think about it. Think about some ideas. Time for the top 3 stories at KSLSports.com. It's sponsored by our friends at J. Brooks Jewelers. J. Brooks, cherish your loved ones. J. Brooks Jewelers. Explore their expertly crafted engagement rings made from the finest materials. JBrooksJewelers.com. That's JBrooksJewelers.com. 2 locations up and down the Wasatch Front. Christian, where are we starting today?
Well, Ben, this came out right before the show started. Utah standout defensive end John Henry Daley has announced he will be entering the transfer portal.
Was he Utah's best player last year?
I think that's fair to say.
He's probably in the conversation. Certainly had to be there. Wayshawn Parker picked it up towards the end of the season. Certainly, Devin Dampier, when you're a starting quarterback, you're impactful. And he was a good starting quarterback. Utah finishes with 10 wins as a result and has a bowl game coming up on Wednesday. I'm very curious to see how much Devin Dampier actually plays in that game. But John Henry Daley announcing he's entering the transfer portal probably should have been expected outside of, as I mentioned earlier in the show, I didn't know he was going to be healthy. You're talking about a guy who I believe it was an Achilles injury, right? And the belief that he tore his Achilles.
I don't know
if it's been reported.
We don't really know the extent.
I think that's been the speculation, though, is that he tore his Achilles. And, every sport is different. Football guys come back from Achilles certainly more quickly than they do in the NBA. But an edge rusher, it's the movement you snap your Achilles on generally is that step back to propel forward. That's when NBA players certainly do it. That's what you do as a defensive end. So I'm very curious to see, A, if he's healthy enough to actually play. He says he's going to be cleared by spring. He knows. The doctors know. But go out and get paid. And I suspect that's what's going to happen. And I don't know if Utah can even gamble on a player like that at this point, considering what they're going to have to put together.
Like that?
Dang. It's trying to go a whole week without it. What they're going to have to put together to be competitive next year with as much as they're losing. So losing John Henry Daley is a big deal. I kind of thought he was going to be out for the season already next year. So losing him maybe not the hugest setback. In fact, I think I said to you off the air yesterday, Christian, it's probably not the worst thing that he's injured the way he is because maybe he'll come back to Utah in 2 years. Clearly, that's not going to be the case. He expects to be healthy now. I would imagine that he will be following Kyle Whittingham to Michigan, but maybe not. You go out and you're the highest. You go to the highest bidder. He was an All-American and was really a terrific talent and a game wrecker for the University of Utah defense. Just another major piece they're going to have to move on from and figure out how to replace. And you may have to do it with an entirely new set of coaches if a Lewis Powell leaves. And Utah's got to look in that direction as well to find out who's going to be coming in and leading that side of the ball. So I'm curious to see what this looks like for Utah. If what Josh Furlong said yesterday is true, and he believes there's probably a 90% chance that Devin Dampier leaves as well. I mean, you're just talking about an entirely new identity at Utah. And that was already expected somewhat because you have a new head coach. You were going to bring in a new defensive coordinator. I don't think anyone thought Jason Beck was going to be leaving when Kyle Whittingham stepped down initially. But this is also just the life of the transfer portal. Not everything can be tagged on you've got a new head coach or you've got new coordinators. Guys just enter the transfer portal. And if you're good, it's stupid, but the transfer portal is stupid and the way NIL works is stupid. If you're good, you should enter the transfer portal. Even if you want to come back, you might as well go and test the waters and see what money's out there.
Yeah, worst case scenario, it's just a bargaining chip, right? Leverage, get more money.
Get a sense of your worth. Or get the same money back. But there's no reason. You're not going to lose money for the most part by entering the transfer portal if you decide to come back. But, yeah, just put the heat on everyone around you. I just can't imagine it. You look at the NBA, which I cover, so I know I bring it up a lot. But you have 15 players, and maybe 5 of them are free agents every year that you have to deal with and figure out that movement. 100 players that are free agents every offseason if they want to be, and 40 of them are really worth bringing back probably every season. Maybe it's as good as 60 that you want to bring back every year, and you've got to deal with how to spend that money. It's ridiculous, and someone's always coming to poach you. We'll see where John Henry Daley winds up. But honestly, the good news for him as a young person is that he's going to be healthy next year.
Yeah, that really makes me wonder if it wasn't a torn Achilles. It just blows my mind. If that was the injury, he tore it in a late season, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't early on. And for him to say that he's going to be fully healthy by spring, it must not have been as bad.
Or maybe it wasn't a full tear.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly there. All right, what's next?
Number 2, the NBA released the first round of All-Star voting. Lauri Markkanen just outside the picture. He was top 16 in Western Conference votes.
Over 110,000 votes. He had 112,000 overall. They've only been open for 12 days. That is a good sign. I mean, people are noticing what he's doing. I do think when you have a 50-point game like he's had early in the season, he had 2. He just had the one 50-point game and several 40-point games. That's a good sign, and fans around the league are taking notice. Now, Remember, and it's the ultimate cat in the wall for the NBA, and one of the things they've screwed up the most under Adam Silver is that the new format,
cat in the wall, eh?
the new format of the All-Star Game is going to feature 3 teams, not just 2, and it's not Western Conference and Eastern Conference. It's 2 teams made up of players born in the United States and 1 team made up of players born internationally. Now, that also counts Canada. So there are 5-ish players that are locks to be in the international roster, assuming they're healthy. Luka, Giannis, Jokic, Wemby, and
Shea
Gilgeous-Alexander as a Canadian. Then Lowry's competing with the Deni Avdias, the Jamal Murrays, the Pascal Siakams, the OG Anunobys, and the Karl Anthony Towns, who was born in the islands and says he wants to play for Team World. It's actually probably better for his all-star bid to try and get to the international team. It's probably easier to make it as opposed to competing with other American centers or United States centers. For Cat specifically.
Yeah. But it hurts Lauri.
Because it takes up one of those spots. Now, where this does get weird is that the voting doesn't change. When you are a fan voting, you don't go and fill out 16 American-born players or U.S.-born players and 8 international players. You just vote for the best players, and the league hopes, and is probably somewhat rightfully so, that you're only actually voting for the starters. The starters get picked 50% fan vote, 25% media vote, 25% player vote, and then the league's coaches choose the reserves for every roster. And if this sounds convoluted, it's because it is. And it's one of the weird things the NBA has always done. The league kind of expects that the coaches will fill out these rosters appropriately. And if they don't, to get to 3 8-man rosters, then Adam Silver will step in and assign players where they need to be to make sure that there's a full 8-man roster on each spot. Those teams then play 3 games. I believe it's to 25. It's a true round robin. And then there's a championship game that comes out of it. It's going to be so many moving pieces, and it's going to be non-competitive, that the build-up and the conversation I just had describing to you what it is somehow going to be more exciting than the actual games itself, which is a bad sign.
And it might be the only year they do it. I mean, they did a one-and-done format last year, and then they already changed it.
Which is the problem. You just have to commit to something. And truthfully, just commit to East versus West. It's what it's always been. You get stars that break out. You get fun moments. Every 4th game is somewhat interesting. The other 3 are bad. It's All-Star Weekend. It's about selling ad space. I know people don't love watching it. It's because the players don't care. I don't know if you're going to make the players care. They used to care in the 90s somewhat. I know we like to romanticize what those games looked like. Those games were also being scored in the 150s and 160s. And yes, in the 4th quarter, they would get competitive. I think if you just sat back, didn't tinker with anything, and let these players get into the 4th quarter and the games were kind of close, the guys would step up and start playing hard. I think that's what you just have to bet on. The idea of changing it to Team USA versus the world. I know that's what happened. It's what they did in the NHL last year, and it was very competitive, where they did the hockey tournament last season in season, and it worked really well, and people were excited about it. They're trying to replicate that. I don't think you're going to be able to do it in the NBA. It's just too much money. These guys make too much money. Yes, certainly there's pride for your country. These guys all have it, but I don't think you're going to see it translate when they go down and play in Los Angeles at the Intuit Dome.
Yeah.
I wish it was better. It's not, but they're trying to monkey with it too much. It's not going to help.
We're so far removed from players caring about the All-Star Game that it seems impossible to bring it back to that level.
And the NFL's had the same problem, and Major League Baseball's had the same problem. It's because All-Star Games, as fun as they are, or the idea is, in practicality, they're not that effective. All right, what's next?
Last night, Utah Mammoth lose 4-3 to the Nashville Predators. Mammoth win percentage dropping below 500 now.
Up 3-2 going into the 3rd period. Steven Stamkos really took over late there, and that's the problem with letting people hang out. Vanacek in between the pipes as the goaltender, with Vermelka out with an upper body injury. It sounds like he's day-to-day. It's just not been good enough for Utah. Vanacek's not been a good backup goaltender. It was nice last year when you had Connor Ingram and Vermelka as the backup. Vanacek has not been great. Vermelka hasn't been terrific when he's been in the pipes either. So it's an issue for the Mammoth, and until they get Vermelka back, they're going to see more higher scoring games like this, and the defense is going to have to step up. They're going to have to execute better on the power play. They were terrible last night. We will talk to Cole Bagley about the Mammoth and their issues coming up at 11:30. It is time to give away some Jazz tickets because it is Tuesday. Be caller number 12 right now, 801-575-ZONE, 801-575-ZONE, and win a pair of tickets to see the Jazz take on the Dallas Mavericks on Thursday January 8th. That's a week from Thursday at the Delta Center, 7 p.m. 801-575-ZONE. 12th caller through right now. When we come back, we'll talk more about Kyle Whittingham to Michigan. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Who's got it better than us?
Your home for the best sports coverage in Utah. You're listening to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. A very happy Tuesday to everybody out there. Christian, it looks like your Broncos are going to back into that number 1 seed.
Back in, yeah. They tried to blow it. They lost to the Jags.
Well, no one did it as bad as the Steelers over the weekend, who lost to the Browns with a chance to guarantee a playoff spot. Now they have to go and beat the Ravens in a must-win game on the final week of the season to make it in there. So we'll see how Rodgers could be the last game of his career. You think Rodgers is done after this year?
I do. I also thought it was funny last night. Matt Stafford all but had the MVP award locked up, and he went and threw 3 interceptions in one game. Basically handed the MVP to Drake May.
Drake May going to win it?
I think so.
Drake May had his best game of his career.
5 touchdowns.
5 touchdowns. Brock Purdy was also good over the weekend. Stephon Diggs having a horrible day today, but Stephon Diggs is a moron. Getting charged with strangulation earlier this month. Was it early in December in Massachusetts? So he's facing a felony charge now, right as the Patriots are getting ready to gear up for a deep playoff run. You know, this is alleged. We'll see what ends up happening with him, but kind of been the issue with him all along. Bills have faded throughout the season and just been one of the more disappointing teams, as they are seemingly every year. So we'll get some new faces in the playoffs this year. I'm excited. We are not going to see Mahomes Mahomes at the very least. We're not going to see him in the AFC Championship game. So we'll see. I'm excited to watch some of these NFL playoffs. I think it's some fresh meat that'll be good for the NFL, as it always is. Not that the NFL is not a juggernaut when it comes to throwing out new faces, but we're going to see some new teams competing and some young stars, which I think is going to be exciting.
Yeah, and it's weird. This year feels like one of the first years where the AFC does not have any juggernauts in the playoffs. Traditionally, it's felt that way with Mahomes and Burrow and Josh Allen. Now it's the NFC. Funny enough, with the Seahawks and Sam Darnold, they look really good, and the Rams and the 49ers. It feels like the Super Bowl winner is going to be one of those 3 teams.
So who's got the most on the line when it comes to legacy? Is it Matt Stafford? I mean, Matt Stafford's already won a title. He's going to be a Hall of Famer.
Honestly, Josh Allen, I think.
Yeah, Josh Allen's a good one.
He needs the Super Bowl win, and this year, again, with no Mahomes, no Burrow, he's going to be the most experienced quarterback in the AFC picture. And it really feels like if he doesn't get it this year, he probably never will. Yeah,
because I don't think the Patriots are going to fade away. And if they aren't able to keep it up in Buffalo, the Patriots are going to stay strong. I mean, you have Drake May for a long time. I mean, Drake May's young and on the rise. So, going to be a tough spot for the Bills. That's kind of always where the Bills are. All right, we're going to talk to Steve Bartle coming up here in about 15 minutes. But I do want to look at the Jay Hill situation and the fact that he hasn't signed. And the fact that Penn State didn't make Kalani Sitake put pen to paper the second he agreed to that deal, which then ended up falling apart and whatever happened, he's staying at BYU. I do think the longer this goes on, the better it is for BYU.
You think the Crumble CEO is going to get off the chair?
I don't want Jay Hill, if he wants to come to Michigan, going back and talking to BYU and being able to be wooed by whatever they can offer, which apparently is somewhat bottomless. Now, I don't actually believe that. I do think there's going to be a limit to how much money they can throw at people. I know they have more and more and more, but if Jay Hill gets paid more, then A-Rod has a reason to ask for more. And if A-Rod has a reason to ask for more, Kevin Young has a reason to ask for more, and all of Kevin's assistants have a reason to ask for more. It's just, there's not actually unlimited money.
Eventually, you're going to have to say no to somebody. And is Jay Hill the guy? Is A-Rod the guy? I'm not sure. So if I'm Kyle Whittingham, I want to get this wrapped up. I understand if you're trying to announce them both and you don't want to announce them both until after Utah has wrapped up their season, which is tomorrow when they take on Nebraska in the Las Vegas Bowl, and you feel like you can announce Jason Beck then with Jay Hill. But I don't think you need to wait for that. I think the sooner you can get these names on paper, the better off you're going to be. So the fact that BYU hasn't allowed that to happen yet, or Whittingham hasn't been able to close that deal yet, is not a terrible sign for BYU. Now, maybe it's still very likely it goes, and they're just waiting on some of the buyout issues. I don't know how all that stuff works behind the scenes, certainly with Jay Hill, but I don't know. The longer this stuff waits, the trickier it feels like it can get.
I totally agree. And funny enough, I almost feel like if I were Utah, I would want Jason Beck announced before the bowl game.
Okay.
Just, it doesn't make sense to have him there, you know. Witt is already gone.
Yeah, Witt's gone. I wonder if you would feel like you'd lose Devin Dampier if Jason Beck transfers, or if Jason Beck announces he's leaving, if Devin Dampier says he's not going to play. I mean, those
Could
guys
be,
know.
What does that matter?
Those guys know Jason Beck's not going to be back.
It's the Las Vegas Bowl against Nebraska.
I'm with you. Bowl games already don't matter. Specifically, these bowl games don't matter. And look, if I'm Utah and I don't think Devin Dampier is going to be my quarterback next year, I'm probably playing Bird Ficklin.
Yeah.
I probably want to see as much Bird as I can to get him out there in a high-profile game like this. So he is comfortable with being the starter going forward of this team if Dampier is not going to be back next year. We'll see which direction they end up heading and who gets the majority of the snaps coming tomorrow. We'll catch up with somebody from Nebraska, get an idea of kind of a preview of that game, and obviously excited to talk to Steve about that coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Is there a reason why Jay shouldn't leave for Michigan?
I honestly don't think so, because if you think that his ultimate goal is to be a head coach, Kyle Whittingham signed a 5-year deal at Michigan. I don't think he's going to last 5 years.
Nobody does.
So what happens then? Unless he's fired and Michigan wants to completely move on from anybody that was on Witt's staff, it makes sense that they would just promote Jay after Witt leaves.
I don't think there's a situation where Jay Hill wouldn't be welcomed back to either Utah or BYU or somewhere as a D coordinator, regardless of what happens at Michigan. You know, if let's say Witt goes there, brings Jay Hill, it falls flat, and Witt gets fired after the second season, and they clean house, I don't think that would tarnish Jay Hill locally.
No.
So to that point, I imagine he's going to make more money at Michigan. And if things go well, which is on the flip side, his name is in the running, not just for the Michigan job, but if you're a good defensive coordinator and you're younger and you had success at BYU and it follows you to Michigan, you're in the running for every head coaching job. You know, the D coordinator at Michigan is one of the sexy positions when it comes to hiring coordinators everywhere in the country. You can go get a job as a head man in the Big 12, or potentially probably not a top SEC school, but a good SEC school, certainly a good ACC school, maybe a Big 10 school as well if you're leaving Michigan. So I'm not sure I understand not leaving unless he doesn't feel like he wants to be a head coach. And if he decided, you know what, I like being a coordinator, which some guys do. Some guys really do like being coordinators and do not want to be the head man. I don't think that's the case with Jay. But if he says, I like where I am, it's relatively safe, as long as Kalani's here, which seems like he's got a lifetime stamp of how long he wants to be the head coach, I'm going to be his go-to guy, and my life's going to be rich. I'm going to be around my family. I'm going to be in a culture I like. I could see that as well. I think that's the only sell, though. I'm not really sure why he wouldn't leave, because the opportunity to become a head coach doesn't get easier at BYU than it would at Michigan.
I never would have thought that Kyle Whittingham would travel, take this job 2,000 miles away when he's said so many times he wants to spend time with his grandkids, yada, yada, yada. So you never know. I have seen a lot of people wondering, if maybe Jay Hill's health would have something to do with it, because he did have the heart attack last year.
Absolutely.
He recovered from it amazingly and led BYU to having a really great defense over the past 2 seasons. So I don't know how much that is affecting things, but it does make sense, logically, to just keep moving on up and up. That's why you become a coach.
And that is what coaches are made of. They are built that way for the most part. Not everyone. You can't paint with that broad of a brush, but basically every coach I've met, assistant or otherwise, has the idea of at one point being the biggest voice in the room. And I would imagine Jay Hill still feels that way, which is why he left Utah in the first place to go to Weber State, had success, couldn't pass on the raise he got at BYU, and then would want to continue to make that jump further. And I'm curious. I'm curious the pathway to become a head coach and the schools he would be eligible for at BYU, how different they are from Michigan. Probably somewhat significant, especially if they win at a high level there. All right, when we come back, we'll talk about this and more with the University of Utah. Steve Bartle's going to join us, give us a breakdown on Morgan Scalley and what he thinks is next for Utah in the coming months. Stick around, Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. We're going to be giving away some Jazz tickets coming up 30 minutes from now, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Cole Bagley's going to join us at 11:30. But as has been the top story of the don't want to say offseason. I guess Utah's still playing, but of the winter so far, Kyle Whittingham's departure escalated when he announced he was going to Michigan last week. Let's welcome in Steve Bartle, our Utes insider at KSLSports.com. What's going on, Steve?
What's up, Ben? How we doing on a Tuesday?
It feels like at least things are a little slowed down from what we've been dealing with really since Christmas wrapped up, and there's just been nonstop news of Michigan movement and now Utah players entering the transfer portal. So I guess even then, the news hasn't fully stopped. All right, big picture, stepping back, is this a catastrophe for Utah? Is this a calamity? Is this not that big of a deal? Is this a good thing going forward? How do you view this for what's happened for the Utes over the last week?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated conversation, right? There's layers to it, there's nuance to it, and there's a lot of questions around how this could happen, right? And I think first and foremost is you have to take sort of the big picture view into consideration with what transpired this month, right? You have to consider the fact that Kyle put it out there himself years ago that he did not want to coach till he, passed 65. You have to consider that he originally named Morgan Scalley his successor and head coach in waiting all the way back in 2019. And obviously he had the title removed and reassigned to him. And when that happened, Kyle, pounded the table for him to get that back. So this has all been in the works for a long time, is this transition. And everything that's been done the last 2 years has been done to make this transition from Kyle to Morgan as seamless as possible. And so, to consider all of that, to get into what's happened, over the last couple of weeks, I think there are questions that have to be answered by Utah administration and how. Kyle has talked now being introduced as the Michigan head coach, and that is such a weird thing to say. From what we were talking about a month ago with Kyle Whittingham to now being the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines football program. It's just, again, sort of surreal, but Utah administration is going to have to answer some questions about how everything went down. And whether that happens or not, I don't know. But there are going to be those questions. And, at the end of the day, you understand why Utah would want to make this transition to Morgan Scalley because, and I wrote about this yesterday, the job, the head coach at a program like Utah, like Arizona State, a non-blue blood program where resources are essentially unlimited, and all of that. A program like Utah, you need a coach that wears multiple hats, that is capable of doing so much beyond just being sort of a CEO type of coach. And that is what Kyle Whittingham became, and he earned that over his 2 decades at the helm at Utah. He operated as a CEO. He delegated a lot of the daily responsibilities to others in that program. But as the job has evolved with the changing landscape and all the changes with the portal and NIL and all of that, there's a lot more on the plate of a college football head coach. And I think for Utah to make this move to Morgan Scalley, it's the right move given where we're at in college football. How it all went down is where the questions start to arise. But making the move, I think, in a lot of ways, is the right decision for Utah. And I think Morgan Scalley is the right guy to lead Utah, into the future of whatever college football is going to be.
Steve, there's always a desire when this happens to point fingers. And sometimes the truth is there's no fingers to be pointed. Sometimes Michigan opens up because their head coach broke into a woman's house and held a knife to her. Or, crazy things happen. And a perfect storm arises and it's not really anybody's fault. Do you think there's a chance that that's what happened? Or do you think there is some fault here where Witt wanted more from Utah, Utah wouldn't offer it? Or they didn't read the cards right, and that that Whit really wanted to continue coaching and would poach people with him, assuming Jason Beck leaves? I mean, what's your sense of how this transpired?
Yeah, I do think there was obviously some and what's the right way to put it? Some resistance in terms of fully committing to it. I think Whittingham has kind of been rejuvenated by the success this year. And, what if he wanted, not just to coach the next year or next 2 years, but what if he wanted, additional time added to his contract and additional, money committed to his contract? If you're Utah, are you ready to commit to that? Where Morgan Scalley, he's had multiple offers over the last 5-6 years, this year included, to leave the program, whether it be as a defensive coordinator at one of the top programs in the country or whether it be as a head coach. He's had offers to leave. And, if Whittingham wanted to stay, I believe Utah wasn't going to say no had Whittingham wanted to stay. There would have been consequences that we don't know what they would have been, but I'm sure there would have been consequences. Morgan Scalley, probably leaves. And so all of that to then lead to his decision to step down, with the Michigan job opening up because, again, like you said, Sharon Moore getting into some risky business there in Ann Arbor, it just created the perfect storm where, he steps down and one of the top jobs in the country in this sport opens up. And in a lot of ways, he's a great candidate for that Michigan job, given what they've experienced in the last few years with all of the issues that have popped up, not just with Sharon Moore, but with Harbaugh and the scandals they've had. Whittingham is an ideal candidate to come in and clean things up, to right the ship, again, in Ann Arbor. So it has been, this is what I mean is there are a lot of layers to this. It is a nuanced conversation. There's a lot to it. And to your point, it is also sort of the perfect storm where, one of the top coaches in the country steps down and one of the top jobs opens up within a week of each other. Like the first time we got to hear from Kyle Whittingham after he stepped down, it was announced, I think an hour earlier. It was announced while we were waiting for media availability that Sharon Moore was being fired. And so it's just kind of been this perfect storm of everything coming together where now Whit is in Ann Arbor and he's trying to build a staff and we'll see what else that means.
Let's assume Jason Beck is gone. That's just, there really hasn't been news of different coordinators or offensive coordinators that Whit would be looking at. It makes a lot of sense for him to follow, especially with the talent they already have at Michigan. How difficult is Morgan Scalley's job this offseason, knowing he has to replace himself, finding a D coordinator, and now has to go out and replace what has been Utah's most successful offensive coordinator in quite a while?
Yeah, I think the job is, a multitude of times more difficult now that Kyle is in Ann Arbor, right? Had this been, had this situation gone down, next month, right? Let's say all of this happens next month with Utah and Whittingham, and he steps down and Morgan steps up. You have everybody in place still. And I think with the perfect storm of what's gone on, it's made Morgan's job that much more difficult because, he's now having to fight to hang on to people. I feel pretty confident that he's in a good spot on the defensive side of the ball with the staff and the guys on that side of the ball. I feel like he has a good idea of who his defensive coordinator is going to be. We've talked a lot about Colton Swan kind of being the favorite, and everything that I've heard continues to suggest that he will be the next defensive coordinator, under Morgan Scalley. And so as long as he's able to retain, that side of the ball, it makes it a little bit easier. But to step into the head coaching role and, now you've got to find an offensive coordinator potentially And, there's been some buzz over the last 12, 24 hours that, Utah is making a push to keep Jason Beck in town. And it sounds like that's continued into this morning where, Beck isn't necessarily a lock to follow Whittingham to Ann Arbor. Morgan has sort of rallied the support around the program, and it sounds like they're making a push to keep Beck in place as offensive coordinator, which, if Utah is able to do that, that's a huge win for Scalley and Utah. But, we don't know exactly. And so, it's made his job that much more difficult. And I apologize, Ben, if I lose, my train of thought. I'm driving around Vegas right now. But, but no, I just think it has made his job that much more difficult. He's got a lot more on his plate where he's now has to find potentially – he's got to fight for an offensive coordinator that, led Utah to great success this season. If he follows Whittingham to Ann Arbor, then he's got to, open up a search for a new offensive coordinator that he's comfortable with, that he feels will buy into his program and his vision of what he wants the offense to look like. And then that means he's going to have to find, additional staff on that side of the ball as well. So, it was going to be difficult to step into the role replacing a living legend. And with what's now going on with Michigan, looking to bring in coaches from the Utah staff and BYU staff as well, it just makes it that much more difficult for Morgan, in the first couple weeks of him on the job.
You mentioned something as we're talking to Steve Bartle, getting the latest on the University of Utah and their new coaching hire. You mentioned who Morgan Scalley is comfortable with. Do you think that means he has to take somebody within his circle and somebody he's worked with previously, or is that Utah already? Or do you think he might have a better ability than Kyle Whittingham to network, maybe explore a little bit different opportunities and go outside the box, which Whit didn't never do? Sometimes Whit was willing to try things outside of the box. They usually didn't work. I'm looking at Troy Taylor. But do you think Morgan is better equipped to do those types of things?
Yeah, I do. I think, Morgan has been really involved in a lot of these, coaching get-togethers, the AFCA, the American Football Coaching Association. He's been heavily involved going out to those and networking. And I've heard a lot of good things about Morgan's, network and the relationships that he has with folks at this level and at the NFL level and high school level. Morgan – he's worked hard to develop good relationships, and being the type of person that he is and the personality that he has, I think he's done a lot to build good relationships. So this will be interesting because I have heard that Morgan's network is a little bit larger than Witt's, but at the same time, it's going to come down to his comfort level with who he brings in. When you're taking over a program, you want guys that believe in you as the head coach and that you also believe in, and that there's a level of trust there, which again could circle back to, Jason Beck, who's been here now a year, and there's obviously a lot of time spent together. That could lead to Aaron Roderick at BYU. The two have a tremendous relationship. Aaron Roderick lives in Sugar House, and the two have remained close friends. And all of that, it could lead to that as well. But I think Morgan will be mindful of how important this hire is. There's been some buzz around Jonathan Smith being a guy, the former Oregon State and Michigan State head coach, as a potential candidate for offensive coordinator. And so those have been sort of the big names so far that have garnered the buzz is Beck, Jonathan Smith and Aaron Roderick. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think there's certainly room for both, right, where Morgan has a network and he needs to explore it to potentially find the right guy. But it's all going to come down to who he trusts and who he has the most comfort with as he starts to, lay the foundation of his program at Utah.
Steve, do you think it's a requirement to bring in a former head coach to add to Morgan Scalley's staff, just considering that they are losing as much or at least losing a veteran in Kyle Whittingham, who is expected to at least be an ambassador for the team?
I don't necessarily think it's a requirement, but I do think, it could be helpful, right? And, here's the thing to know about Morgan and what's been going on, behind the scenes at Utah the last couple of years is he's really, taken hold of a lot of the responsibilities, the day-to-day responsibilities of a head coach, managing practices and setting forth plans and meetings and all of that sort of stuff. So there's familiarity with the job, but it's different when you are the guy on Saturdays and you've got to be, all of these different things. So I do think it would be beneficial. I don't necessarily think it's a requirement, but I do think it is something that he is probably considering, again, given the fact that, he has talked to and interviewed Jonathan Smith, who has that head coaching experience. I do think it would be beneficial, but not necessarily a requirement for Morgan.
Switching over to the Michigan side, what do you think Whit is going to be looking for to bring with him? And that can be at Utah or BYU. That can be players. They have a quarterback. I think that's a good sign for both BYU and Utah that they've already got the guy in place. At least we think they have the guy in place. That's certainly been Whit's big push. But what do you think Whit is going to be looking to bring with him because he doesn't have that big network?
Yeah, it's going to be the big names here in Utah, right? It's going to be Jason Beck. It's going to be Jay Hill. Those are going to be the guys that he wants to bring with him because, his network is not the biggest. And so those are the big names that are getting pushed. And obviously Jim Harding is another big name. And when you consider the fact that Jim hails from the Midwest, that's going to be an attractive thing for him. And so I think those are probably the three big names that we're looking at as guys that will be the focus for Whittingham and who he wants to bring into Michigan. And then from there, it's going to be about, finding the right balance, with the rest of his staff and the position coaches. He's going to want some guys that have been at Michigan, and have familiarity with the job that can kind of give them the lay of the land and the lay of the roster. And it sounds like they have a good idea of who a handful of those guys are going to be. Tony Alford is the running back coach there, who's a tremendous recruiter, and Whittingham actually has kind of a unique relationship with the Alfords as he coached Tony Alford's older brother. So there's a connection there. I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of defensive position coaches at Michigan stay in place there. And I think that's going to be the key. And then, for Whittingham, it goes beyond just the football coaches. Your strength and conditioning coach is kind of it sort of is the foundation of your culture and your program is the strength and conditioning coach. They are the guys that have their hands on players, that work hand in hand with players during the off season. These are guys that are establishing the culture of how things are going to be, of how hard they need to work, and sort of the mindset and the toughness that they need to build. So I would anticipate Doug Eliasaya following Kyle Whittingham as well. And then you start to consider maybe personnel staff and recruiting staff. And so I think Whittingham is probably going to end up with a staff where, there are probably 5, 6, maybe 7 coaches from the state of Utah that join him on staff. And then, the rest will be filled by Michigan and potentially other places as well. So I think that's sort of the mixture that you're looking for if you're Kyle Whittingham in Ann Arbor.
Do you think it's more likely that Jay Hill or Jason Beck follows him?
Ooh, what a great question. Yeah, I think it's very likely that both do end up, but I know that both BYU and Utah are making a push to hang on to him. So it's going to be interesting. Like I said, the last 12, 24 hours has been really interesting to get some updates over the course of the day, because it seemed like as of Sunday that they were done deals. Beck and Hill were done deals to follow Whittingham to Michigan, and that may ultimately end up being the case. But I've heard and know that Utah continues to make a push for Beck, and I've heard that BYU is doing the same for Hill. So if I had to pick which one is more likely, I would probably say, Jay Hill, given the relationship there and the experience that Jay has under Kyle Whittingham, and you go there as a defensive coordinator, and Jay Hill, I know, has aspirations to be a head coach, and I know that Jason Beck does as well. But I know that Jay Hill, being where he's at in his career, you go to a place like Michigan and you find success there, it's going to lead to great opportunities. And given his experience as a head coach at Weber State, I'm sure he's kind of chomping at the bit to get his hands on a program and make one, a power conference program his. So I would lean towards Jay Hill being more likely of the two, but I think both are in the same boat.
Is Utah's starting quarterback already on the roster for next season?
Oh, that's a great question. And, you brought up, Kyle Whittingham and who he's going to hang on to, there at Michigan. You mentioned the quarterback situation. Bryce Underwood is one of the biggest talents, at quarterback that we've seen in quite some time. He's got a lot of work to do in terms of, the nuances and the mental aspect of the game, but he's a big talent there at Michigan. But it's been reported that he's going to talk it over with his family, that he's going to consider his options, and he's going to make a decision, after the bowl game that they play tomorrow as well. And so, there's certainly some risk there where maybe Underwood does end up entering the portal and leaving Michigan. He's got, I've heard, plenty of interest and plenty of people willing to pony up to bring him in because he is that sort of talent, and that could impact things. But if he stays, in place at Michigan, I do think Utah has their quarterback on the roster. That doesn't necessarily mean that both Dampier and Bird will be on the roster, but at least one of them will be if Underwood stays in place there at Michigan, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess the weird thing was it seems like Bird had at least accepted the idea that he could come in as the backup next year at Utah if Jason Beck stayed and Devin Dampier was the starter. Maybe Bird would do another year as a backup. If that's the case, would he be okay being a backup at Michigan? That seems like a logical upward move.
Yeah. No, it's definitely being considered. There are so many things at play here with these quarterbacks. These three quarterbacks: Bryce Underwood, Devin Dampier, and Bird Ficklin. There are so many different scenarios that could play out. But I think Utah, let's say Dampier leaves and you don't want to lose Bird because you've seen what he can do, even in a limited role as a backup, right? You're probably willing to pony up to keep him in place and consider him your starter, your QB1 going into next year. But if you're Bird, right, and, let's say Dampier sticks around, you could make that move to Michigan and be the backup to Bryce Underwood. And you have that experience under Jason Beck, and Jason Beck would probably like to use you. There's so many different scenarios here that could play out. But yeah, it's all going to hinge on what Underwood decides to do after he talks it over with his family in the next couple of days.
The timing of all this is why the bowl season is so terrible. Suddenly, what do you expect tomorrow from Utah? I know it's just a total mystery with all the changes that have been made, but what do you expect against Nebraska?
That's going to be it's going to be interesting, right? Because Utah has the full, I don't want to say the full set of players available to them, but they've got the bulk of their roster that is down here and expected to play. Obviously, there's only a handful of opt-outs with Caleb Logu, Spencer Fano, and Logan Fano. Outside of that, everybody else is down here. The quarterbacks, even Devin Dampier and Bird Ficklin. So I think there's a mindset with this group that they want to finish this season on a high note. They want to get to 11 wins. That's only been done a handful of times that Utah is getting to 11 wins. And so, there is motivation. How, what does it look like? What does the demeanor look like? I don't know. Like, that's kind of the interesting dynamic with these bowl games now, is you never really know what you're going to get. There isn't the same sort of, motivation to come out and all that. These bowl games just don't have the same value and meaning like they used to. But I do think there is that sense, that feeling from this group that they want to finish this season on a high note, and whatever ends up happening after that, they'll live with it, but they want to finish the season, with the right type of punctuation on it.
Well, Steve, I'm sorry you didn't get to enjoy any of your holiday break. You've been busy, and it seems like it's going to stay busy with the portal opening up on Friday. So I wish you the best. I hope you find a time to get a nap and enjoy Las Vegas.
Appreciate it, Ben, man. Have a good one. And, it's going to be interesting tomorrow. Should be a lot of fun. And getting into next month, the fun is going to continue. So appreciate you, Ben.
Happy New Year, Steve. There he is, Steve Bartle, our University of Utah insider with some great insight. And, I really hadn't thought about the idea of, it'd be great if you're Devin Dampier and you want to enter the transfer portal, you could certainly go and look at schools that are going to have openings. A lot of teams are going to have quarterback openings. Arizona State's been mentioned. Who knows? Texas Tech could open up. We will see what that looks like. We'll see where Devin Dampier were to end up. But if Bird was happy being a backup at Utah, maybe he's happy being a backup at Michigan and making more money and then being the next in line to take that job. Maybe neither of these guys is back for Utah next year, and that's certainly a possibility if you bring in a new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, it's just that's the reality that Utah has to face right now. Even just 2 weeks ago, thinking that you're set for a Big 12 championship run next season, now all of a sudden you have no idea what your expectations for 2026 could be.
Wayshawn Parker, Devin Dampier, Bert Ficklin, John Henry Daley, J.J. Buchanan. We just do not know who's going to be on this team. You knew the entire offensive line was going to be moved off already. 2 of them going to the NFL and 3 of them being upperclassmen. So bizarre. It's a bizarre. I really do feel for college football fans right now. I'm not a fan of any team in college football, so it doesn't affect me on that personal level the way I know it does with some fans. I feel for you. Not having the certainty or any understanding of what your roster is going to look like next year has got to be really difficult. So I feel for fans across the college football landscape. All right. I also feel for Mammoth fans because the team has not played particularly well this season. We'll talk to Cole Bagley coming up next. How do you break out of this? What's it got to look like? And if it's not this season, if it's next season, what does that look like? Cole will join us coming up next. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Whether it's the Jazz, Utes, Cougars, or Aggies, these guys have got you covered.
Time to eat, fellas.
You're locked on to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson.
1, 2, 3, move it.
On 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Let's welcome in our Utah Mammoth insider, Cole Bagley. It's all brought to you by Utah First Federal Credit Union, growing stronger together. What's going on, Cole?
How are you, Ben?
I've got a question for you. Is it legal to shoot the puck on the power play, or are you just supposed to pass the puck around for 2 minutes? Because that's what I saw a lot of last night.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, but before the game kind of flipped on its head, I was actually doing, part of my hat trick. I was writing about how the power play has made a lot of progress from November to December. And to be honest, it has. It was their power play in November was like 5.7%, and in December it's at about 18%. So month over month, like up 13%, that's a pretty big jump. But then, things kind of went south. They had several more power plays. And while it looked really pretty in terms of moving the puck, if you can't get it across the goal line, then it's all for nothing, like you said. So, yeah, it was an interesting one last night. It's probably the best the power play has looked without scoring, which is definitely frustrating for a lot of Mammoth fans.
Early in the season, I found myself yelling at the television a lot because it seems like Nick Schmaltz would be, especially in the power play, wide open in front of the net and would look to pass. I mean, wouldn't even look at the net. It's just like shoot the puck. And I think we saw that again last night. Now, as I was doing that early in the year, Nick Schmaltz then broke out and had that incredible run, and I thought that really kind of spurned their or spurred their 7-game winning streak that they had early in the season. My question is, does it still feel like they're close? Does it feel like a breakthrough is possible for this team, or are you getting to the point where you think it's just not going to happen this year?
I think a breakthrough is possible. I'm just not entirely sure what it's going to take. When I was looking at the game last night, and then I looked at their record over the course of the season, in games this year that have been decided by a single goal, that means I'm not counting games that have included 2-goal losses, empty netters. So just games simply decided by 1 goal, 2-1, 3-2, 4-3. Utah has lost 11 times. Now, 3 of those are in overtime, obviously, but then there's 8 more of their 19 losses in regulation have been by 1 goal. So they're so close. And that, again, that's not even counting games that, added an empty netter. So there's probably another 7 or 8 games that have been decided that way. So they're losing so many 1-goal games. And you kind of have to ask yourself the question of, what is the difference? Why are they being exploited 9 out of 10 times by making one simple mistake
in a third period or whenever it happens, as opposed to being the ones, doing the exploiting, right? Making sure that, they're playing sound hockey and not making mistakes that are costing them late in these games, but it just continues to happen. So a breakthrough, I think, is possible. It's just, what is it exactly going to take? I'm not sure, and obviously I don't think the Mammoth have figured that one out either.
Vanacek did not look great, especially in the third period there with the 2 Stamkos goals, but you have mentioned maybe looking to add talent at the goaltender position. Is that enough to give them just a little bit of an edge? Like, how much better do they have to get to reach their goal of making the playoffs this season?
That's a really good question. I do think that, potentially looking in the trade market for another goaltender would probably be smart. It's tough with Vanacek because he's only played, I think last night was his 11th game. And for goaltenders, Utah's played they played 40 games. So he's only been given an opportunity in 11 of those, which means, Vejmelka's played in the other 29. It's really hard to get into a groove, to settle into your game, to feel confident between the pipes when you've only played in 11 and you've lost 9 of those. So in terms of what they need to do, we've talked about it quite a bit over the last few weeks, is, they need to continue to keep their head above water. They need to make sure they're probably winning 50 or 60% of these games until the Olympic break, because then, if you can get Logan Cooley back, if maybe you can make a few, minor adjustments via the trade market, maybe you can bring in a top 6 type center or a goaltender that can maybe make up those differences. Because like they talked about, they're losing so many games by just 1 goal. It's not like they're getting, blown out. It's not like they're losing by 3 or 4 where you just kind of put your hands up and go, man, this team is terrible. No, they're really good, but they're just not quite good enough to win the tight games to help put themselves in a position to be in a playoff spot.
We have seen improved play from Dylan Guenther again. It seems like he is back, and he's been very active. What have you seen from him, especially in the absence of Logan Cooley?
Yeah, I'd say that, since Logan Cooley went down, Guenther has arguably been the best player on the team and stepped up more than anybody. In the 10 or 11 games since Cooley went down, Guenther's got points in 7 of those. I believe he's got 10 total points. He's got a handful of game winners and OT winners, and that one pass to Keller on the OT winner against Winnipeg. He's just been more assertive. I think he's just played with a little bit more energy, a little bit more urgency. He's scoring in a lot of different ways, whether it's last night where, he's going right at the net and, kind of scoring a greasy goal, or, he's helping his teammates out and set him up like he did, again, last night, a gorgeous pass to Frank Peterka on the back door for an easy tap. And to me, it's just, he's elevated his awareness, he's elevated his urgency, and he's being rewarded with a lot of points right now.
The last time it seemed like things were dire, and I don't think they're quite as dire as they were a couple of weeks ago or maybe a month ago for the Mammoth, but they did make some changes to the roster, and they brought up Maverick Lamoureux, and they brought up Daniil Boot, and they sent a couple of players down. How have those young players performed, in your opinion? Do you think they're getting better? Do you think that's been a help? Do you think it's done what they've intended?
Yeah, I really like Daniil Boot. Simashev is obviously still in the AHL. Maverick Lamoureux was just on a short stint with the team because they had some defensemen on IR and had some injuries, but, Oli Mata came back and, Juuso Välimäki came back. And so, Utah had to send Maverick Lamoureux back down. I think he was great. I think he played a lot better. And I think it was like 4 or 5 games that he participated in. What I liked about Mav's game was, a year ago, it felt like he was trying to do too much. It felt like he was really trying to play outside of his game by trying to be more offensive-minded than he really is. And not that Mav can't necessarily be that, but it was almost like he was trying to simply do that, which cost him time and again. He was caught pinching a lot of times. He gave up a lot of odd man rushes. He's sitting in the box, whereas this year he's really stuck to his own identity, which is just being a true defensive defenseman. He's got the size, he's got the reach, he can close down space really well, and that's what he did, during this opportunity with the Mammoth earlier this month. And then as for Daniil Boot, I really liked what I've seen from him. I think he's potentially ahead of schedule in terms of his development. Coming into this year, I think there was a pretty big belief that, Simashev would be the one coming in and asserting himself and staying with the team, whereas Boot would probably need a little bit more development in the AHL. And obviously things started off, I think, where they thought they would, but then Simashev started to struggle with his game, so they had to send him down. Boot was excelling in the AHL, so they had to bring him up. And, with Boot, he's got incredible size, which I think this team greatly lacks. He's one of the biggest players on the ice every time he's out there. He's been a menace in front of the net. What I want to see him do better, though, is I'd like to see him be able to finish his opportunities. He had 2 really good opportunities last night. Pass from Michael Carcone right on the back door on a 2-on-1 opportunity, and he couldn't put it away. That's potentially a goal that changes the outcome of the game. So I think for Boot, it's to continue to do those things that he's doing, but to hopefully put more of a finishing touch on those chances.
World Juniors are also going on right now, as you have to track a little bit more than just the pro team or the highest level team in the NHL. Who has been playing in the World Juniors, specifically Team Canada, and how they looked?
Yeah, the Mammoth have, I think, 7 prospects playing in the World Juniors right now, which is tied for the most in the National Hockey League, alongside, I believe, the Nashville Predators. And it's, not to say that the ones not on Team Canada aren't, good players, but the best Mammoth prospects are playing for Team Canada. You've got TJ Ginla, you got Caleb Denoyer, and you got Cole Baudouin. TJ Ginla has been fantastic. He's got several goals, a couple points. I think Tej is having the season that the Mammoth were really hoping and expecting from him following his injury. He had a decent training camp. He didn't prove that he was quite NHL ready. So what has he done? He's gone back to the juniors. He's putting up 2 or 3 points per game, and then he goes into World Juniors for Team Canada, and he's definitely been a standout with his ability to score and to get to the net and to find teammates. As for Caleb Denoyer, I believe he registered a point last night. It was a really nice play where he kind of demonstrated his elite vision and his silky smooth hands to navigate through the offensive zone and put one in the back of the net. Cole Baudouin, he's been good. He's a different player, right? He's kind of a bigger body. He's more of a workhorse. He's going to, battle in the dirty areas. He's going to, try and help win you face-off. So for the most part, I think, Utah's prospects have had a good showing, especially the ones playing for Team Canada.
Cole, what's coming up? You've got a 3-game road trip to open the new year, and then back home for some games for the Mammoth.
Yeah, so they're doing their New York trip right now, so they're going to go take on the Islanders, the Devils, and the Rangers. Like I said earlier, at this point, Utah, they really need to be at a minimum, I think, winning every other game. You really got to be pulling in points at about 50 to 60% of these games right now to just keep your head above water. And we'll see what happens. They played a lot of road games. I think they've played the first or second most road games in the National Hockey League to this point in the year. And now, that home schedule is kind of going to soften up for them. I think they're home for 7 straight here in January. There's a lot of winnable games. You're playing teams like Ottawa and St. Louis and Columbus and Seattle. Toronto's had some struggles. They do have to play Dallas and Philadelphia, who are, Dallas is one of the better teams in the NHL, and Philly's had a really good year in the Eastern Conference. But this is, Utah has talked about for a lot of the season is getting to this point in the schedule, right? Like the first half of this season was very heavy in terms of, games on the road. It was very challenging, especially with the condensed schedule in terms of, playing almost every other night, especially in December and late November. They played so many games. And so this is where it softens up a bit. This is an opportunity to keep their heads above water, to win some games at home, and to keep fighting. And I think that's really what they're trying to do right now is to just stay alive. And so if they can do that, they can get to the Olympic break, still in the race, and then hopefully get some reinforcements. This team is going to have a chance to make a push.
Our conversation with Cole is brought to you by Hercules First Federal Credit Union, growing stronger together. Cole, great stuff. Look for your coverage coming up in the new year.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
There he is, Cole Bagley. A very happy new year to Cole and his coverage of the Utah Mammoth. Read it at KSLSports.com. It is time to give away some Utah Jazz tickets. It is a Win Ticket Tuesday or a Jazz Ticket Tuesday. Be the 12th caller through right now, 801-575-ZONE, 801-575-ZONE. Win a pair of tickets to see the Jazz take on the Dallas Mavericks coming up Thursday, January 8th at the Delta Center at 7 p.m. 801-575-ZONE. Be the 12th caller through right now. We'll wrap up the show. Coming up next, Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
You're listening to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Two niggas on the airways, talking sports. They got him made Jason on soul. Loves his tie guy, Ben's got style with his stars. Oh my. From the islands to the basketball court.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in today. While I was gone, which was most of us over the Christmas break, college basketball was somehow ruined further. And Baylor announced that they were bringing in James Nagy, the former 31st overall pick in the NBA draft, who never played in the NBA, but was drafted by an NBA team, stashed, came from Europe, or at least came from overseas. So he had never played a college basketball game before, went to the NBA, didn't play in an NBA game, but has decided he wants to go back to college, and he is enrolling at Baylor and is going to be available for the second half of the season. Somewhat similarly, Lucas Langorita, I'm sure I'm saying his name wrong, I apologize, is joining the University of Utah from Spain. He's going to be here for the rest of the year. Played professionally in Spain and has made the jump over. Yegor Demin, Boskovic last year for BYU. We've seen a lot of these kids that play pro. Now there's the new one with Trent Flowers, who's actually played NBA games, who is testing going back to college. He's played regular season NBA games and is considering going back to college to play. I thought Coach Calipari last night from Arkansas had a good rant on the insanity that's going on in college basketball right now, and I wanted you to hear it.
You ready? Mid-season. Unless you're in the school. This is an easy roll. We can do this, NCAA. Don't tell me about lawsuits. If you join a program at mid-season, you cannot play that season. If you're in school and have to get yourself eligible, that's okay. You can play the second term without playing the first. What? So now, let me ask you this. What does that do for the kids in the program that you're bringing kids in at midseason when it was their opportunity? I mean, I just don't get any of this. And again, Tommy, Mark Few, myself, we got my son, their sons are in this. I just want to help it before I'm out for my kid. I'm very selfish. But it's for that. But this stuff here, I just gave you what we could do. I'm going to give you one other. The collectives on our campuses, whether you're doing it through your media people, whatever, cannot be involved in recruiting in any way or transfers. But if a kid's on your campus for a year, give them what you want to stay. So we'll get more kids staying. How about this? It'll be great for them academically. They'll probably make more money, but they'll be academic. We're not going to have kids leaving after transferring 4 times. What's the percentage of kids that make the NBA? Unless you play for me. What would be the percentage? Like it's like 1% or less? That means 99% of the college players that are getting money, it's fugazi. Fugazi. Because they're getting 400, 500, 800, a million, and they're not pros. So now they have to go get a job after 4 stops. No college degree. No loyalty from the state or the program or anybody. You were a mercenary. Okay. Now you got to go get a job. I don't care what a kid makes. It doesn't. But I do care what we're doing to young people. If all these kids could make $4 million, I don't care. But what we're doing by letting them have transfer at will. Transfer once. Coach leaves. You can go twice without penalty. But other than that, you got to sit out. Because now you get 3 years at one school, you're going to get a college degree. You can't be 30. You got 5 years. Clock is ticking. If you go pro, I don't care what country you're from. You leave your name in. You cannot play college basketball. If you transfer mid-season, can't play. You got to sit out. How about we just do that stuff? We can do it without having Congress and the Senate getting 60 votes. We can do that. Let them sue us on that stuff. I wish you wouldn't ask me that question.
There he is, Coach Calipari. I've never been quite as down on Coach Calipari as I know a lot of people are. He has played the game differently than a lot of college coaches, but I think there's a lot of sense in what he's saying. And I guess what we missed there, or he touched on it a little bit, is if you leave your name in, he's talking about the draft. If you go into the draft, you leave your name in the draft, you are no longer eligible to play in college, and I think that's totally fair. I try to be open-minded about these types of things. Give kids opportunities to succeed and make money. I don't have a problem with that. I do think he's right that if you are allowing kids to transfer in mid-season, the kid who committed before the year is now competing for a job against players he didn't realize he was committing to. And look, it's competition. I'm not anti-competition in that sense. But if a kid signed to play at a school where there was only 2 point guards and he was one of the point guards, he felt like he was going to get that opportunity to play, and then you replace him with anybody, European or otherwise, mid-year, yeah, I get it makes your team better, but what does it do to that kid and that kid's opportunity and why he chose your school and what he thought from loyalty and what he thought of adult mentorship and some of those things that are valuable? So I thought it was interesting what Coach Calipari said. I'm sure there are people who differ with me. And look, if Utah fans end up seeing more wins because this kid transfers in from Spain and he's the best player on the team, they'll take it. BYU was happy to have Yegor Demon on their roster last season. Boscovich, happy to have him on your roster last season. Winning is what people want to see, and these kids can bring wins.
It's tough because on one hand, the argument could easily be, well, these guys are making millions of dollars, regardless of if somebody transfers in over them midseason.
Yep.
But that's the thing, is they're not pros. Like, they should not be having to deal with that because they should be attending university, and that should be their main point. Like Coach said, a lot of these guys are transferring 3-4 times. Yeah, they get paid, but they ultimately still have to go end up finding a job, and they don't have a degree.
And it makes no mention of what's happening on campus, which if people don't realize this, a lot of basketball players specifically drop out of school, football the same way, the day their eligibility is no longer impacted by going to class. The second your classes end, or the second your season ends, I should say, especially in college football, you're done. You are not waking up early to go to trig. You are done with school. You got kids transferring in now mid-season to go to 6 weeks, 7 weeks of college before dropping out. It's got to be insane to be one of the coaches there. I understand everyone's trying to keep their head above water and stay competitive to keep their $1 million jobs. It has ruined the product. College basketball is nearly unwatchable, which is too bad because right now we have a very fun local college basketball product, and with what BYU has been able to do and what Utah State's been doing relatively consistently. All right, we will get you ready for the Utah and Nebraska game tomorrow on the show, so we will be on the air. Make sure to tune in from that. In fact, I think Morgan Scalley is going to be talking to the media right now with some Utah players, so maybe we can play some of that for you tomorrow. I think that'll be a good idea. Hans and Scotty are coming up next. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.